who really needs it, and the way of doing it is either by having Dean Ambrose come away with the victory at WrestleMania or by putting up one hell of a fight against Brock Lesnar, which is obviously what he's expected to do, and it wouldn't surprise me none if that was the way it goes, with something like the Wyatts coming out and interfering at the last minute when we least expect the Wyatts to do so. Either Braun Strowman comes out, does a number on Brock Lesnar, or all the Wyatts, all 4 or 5 of the Wyatts, come from out of nowhere and blindside Brock Lesnar, allowing Dean Ambrose to win the match, and that's it. Or we see Dean Ambrose become the newest member of the Wyatts, which wouldn't surprise me none if Dean Ambrose did align himself with the Wyatts, because of just how unpredictable this match seems to get and how more unpredictable it seems to get as we get closer to WrestleMania. There's also Paul Heyman, who could factor in as probably the manager of Dean Ambrose, unveiling that concept at WrestleMania, which would blindside us all too. I just think there's just really a lot that goes with Dean Ambrose's character because of how he reminds me of Brian Pillman and some of the craziest wrestlers he's across. Really between Brian Pillman and Sid Justice, in my opinion, either one of those two legends in professional wrestling, because of just how crazy he can be on times, and just putting him in the ring with someone like Brock Lesnar just allows that crazy side to really be exposed in a way I think that it's never been exposed or looked at before from the point of view of a wrestling fan who's watched it for a number of years. And you have the manager of Dean Ambrose be the likes of someone like Paul Heyman, who's taken names like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker to their first championship in teams like the Midnight Express. Just imagine what that could do for someone like Dean Ambrose. We've seen Paul Heyman manage some of the most successful wrestlers and champions of all time, and arguably he's been known as the greatest manager in wrestling history, and probably will go down in history for being known as one of its greatest managers. And can you imagine the asset that it would be for Dean Ambrose, either that or by making him a member of the Wyatts? Again, there are so many unpredictable ways this one could go, and it could go a long way in benefiting someone like Dean Ambrose. And if you were looking at creating a star of tomorrow to replace someone like a Daniel Bryan, then obviously the way of doing that it would be by pushing someone like a Dean Ambrose, who has never been given this sort of opportunity in main events. The biggest main event that Dean Ambrose probably ever was in his life was when he was teaming with the Shield members against the Brothers of Destruction and Daniel Bryan, when they had Team Hell No team up with The Undertaker for the UK tour a number of years ago. And that, to that point, and really still now, was the biggest main event that Dean Ambrose ever was in before he was one of the final 2 members of the Royal Rumble match. And the place exploded when they realized Dean Ambrose had a chance of going all the way and winning the match to headline WrestleMania, which is why I want someone to explain to me why Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose is not for the championship this year at WrestleMania, and why Roman Reigns and Triple H is believed to be the match that everybody thinks is going to steal the show this year at WrestleMania. Triple H and Roman Reigns, in my opinion, is not ratings. It's not a way of getting subscribers to your network. It's not a way of selling a pay-per-view and getting over 1 million buys. The way to do it would be to have Brock Lesnar facing Dean Ambrose for the championship, because the fans would realize that Dean Ambrose has a chance of pulling a John Cena or a Dave Bautista from WrestleMania 21 a number of years ago by becoming champion, with Lesnar as your champion, obviously dominating, seeming unbeatable, the conqueror of conquerors, facing someone like Dean Ambrose, who obviously deserves this opportunity to face someone for a major championship. Yeah, one way of looking at it is by giving him the Intercontinental Championship. Another way would be by giving him another singles championship. But I really think what needs to happen here for Dean Ambrose is he needs to be given a chance to win the WWE World Heavyweight Championship and really see what he can do, because that's when his fullest potential will really shine through, and something will be done with Dean Ambrose that will be meaningful and be looked back on as some of the most successful times in really a period of his career which he has yet to get to and really reach the pinnacle and realize his fullest potential, which I think is going to be really enjoyable for a lot of Dean Ambrose fans, including myself, who I am a really big fan and supporter of. And who can blame me for being a huge Dean Ambrose fan? Because Dean Ambrose, in my opinion, is one of the most unpredictable wrestlers in the business. And in terms of a wrestling psychologist of the new era of professional wrestling, yeah, you have your Bret Harts, you have your Roddy Pipers, you have your Undertakers, obviously, of generations past. But I think he's really a leader and a voice of the new generation when you're talking about some of the best psychologists who have really gone a long way in redefining what this business is really all about. And there's no one who can tell me that Dean Ambrose has not redefined what being a wrestling psychologist is really all about, because he has in more ways than one. You can put him in a feud with Bray Wyatt and focus on the past of Dean Ambrose and his family. You can put him in the ring against someone like the Boogeyman, and Dean Ambrose would do the greatest job in the world of being one of the best wrestling psychologists, which is why I think wrestling psychology in this feud with the likes of of Brock Lesnar is really going to be something to focus on, and I think it will probably never get the attention it deserves, because I think Dean Ambrose really has this great understanding of what wrestling psychology is really all about, and that's what it comes down to. If there's no psychology in a feud, take for instance The Undertaker versus Shane McMahon, you take psychology out of the equation, and what is Shane McMahon versus The Undertaker left with? The fact that it's taking place within the confines of the Hell in a Cell. It's not taking place because of wrestling psychology, and there's nothing really interesting in terms of a storyline. You take the psychology out of it, and you have nothing for The Undertaker and Shane McMahon's feud and rivalry to fall back on, which is probably just going to be a one-night thing. It's probably going to be a one-time deal between The Undertaker and Shane McMahon because of that. But then you look at something like Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose, and you say, hey, there's a lot of wrestling psychology with this. There's an opportunity here to create, and I hope WWE realizes that in terms from a creative standpoint and takes full advantage of that, because that's when we're going to see the fullest potential of not only Dean Ambrose, but Brock Lesnar and everybody else Dean Ambrose will feud with really shone through. Now, obviously, Dean Ambrose dropping the Intercontinental title leaves us with the impression, undoubtedly, that there are big things in store for the future of Dean Ambrose, probably a Money in the Bank briefcase or a WWE Championship reign, because he's no longer Intercontinental Champion, and that honor goes back to Kevin Owens, who he was feuding with prior to this match with Brock Lesnar, which was obviously just a catapult for bigger things to be realized for Dean Ambrose. And I think that, losing the Intercontinental title is just a sign of really big things for Dean Ambrose to come, either in the way of a Money in the Bank, if that honor does not go to him, probably AJ Styles, and probably a future WWE Championship reign, World Heavyweight Championship reign, some way or somehow for Dean Ambrose, and it could all come because of their victory, which would really be the start of things for Dean Ambrose at WrestleMania 32. In my opinion, the match to be excited for this year obviously is Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar. You can't go wrong with this match. Again, there are so many things that factor into this. How Dean Ambrose and Triple H were the final two in the Royal Rumble, which is why I still wanted to explain to me why Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar was never the championship match this year at WrestleMania, or why it wasn't even considered to be the championship match. It probably was in board meetings. They probably, considered Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar to be the championship match, and probably Brock Lesnar was supposed to be champion, but they wanted something more for Brock Lesnar to do this year at WrestleMania, and obviously they believed finally that it was time for Brock Lesnar to be used to create superstars rather than be dominating, and it was supposed to have been Brock Lesnar. There was a rumor actually on wrestling news websites of how Lesnar was supposed to be champion rather than Triple H, and it was supposed to have just been Triple H versus Roman Reigns. But really, I think what we should have seen this year at WrestleMania, and that's in my mind, would be something like Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker, and probably have something like Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar for the championship. That would really have changed the complexity of WrestleMania and probably made the WrestleMania card and show look a lot better, because this pay-per-view really isn't offering us anything as wrestling fans. What is there to be excited about for WrestleMania this year? Are you really excited to find out who's going to emerge victorious in a match between Triple H and Roman Reigns? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Or either that, Shane McMahon versus The Undertaker. This is not really going to boost your morale. This is not really going to boost your ratings of pay-per-views or your subscribers to your network, which obviously the majority of wrestling fans have subscribed to because they don't want to pay a fortune for pay-per-views. And with these pay-per-views offering us lackluster shows and outcomes, who's really going to blame the wrestling fans for subscribing to the network rather than buying a pay-per-view for one night? I'm not going to stoop that low to buying a pay-per-view for one night with matches like Shane McMahon versus The Undertaker as your main events, the McMahons headlining WrestleMania. So that's why I think I wanted to explain to me why Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose is not your main event, or at least not a number one contenders match, or obviously this match should have been, because I think that there's a lot of potential that goes with it in terms of wrestling psychology and just how much can be created off of this. Probably a series of matches is probably what we're looking at in the fallout of WrestleMania. Probably an Extreme Rules match between Dean Ambrose and Brock Lesnar. We know it's a street fight at WrestleMania, but an Extreme Rules match in the fallout of WrestleMania, because the first pay-per-view in the fallout of WrestleMania obviously is Extreme Rules. So we'll see something in the way of an Extreme Rules match, a cage match between Dean Ambrose and Brock Lesnar, which could be the second match of the series. We could see throughout the spring and the early summer of 2016 lasting up until that point. Again, going back to how I believe there's a lot that can be created for something like Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar. And in terms of conversation, I think this is one of the most talked about matches we are hearing about throughout social media. There are photos, there are videos, there are conversations in the way of tweets, people Instagramming photos and videos, and just conversations and thoughts on Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar. Conversation unquestionably is at an all-time high for this match, and this is what you want for a match like Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose that may not be being taken as seriously as what wrestling probably wants it to be taken. So with the conversation being this high for a match that you wouldn't expect to be taken so seriously by wrestling fans and the population that exists out there, that's what really excites me for this match, because you realize conversation is at an all-time high for it, and there is so much to be created when you're talking about something like Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar, because what else is being offered this year at WrestleMania? As I said, Shane McMahon versus The Undertaker, and obviously something like Roman Reigns versus Triple H, which really is not what you want to see for WrestleMania. I wrote about this from my column for the Feud of Shane McMahon versus The Undertaker just last night. This is not the WrestleMania main event that I envisioned for an event as big, or supposed to have been as big as WrestleMania 32. Something like Sting versus The Undertaker would have been my choice, or Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker would have been my choice for a match at WrestleMania, because it's been talked about for years. And with how big WrestleMania was supposed to have been, obviously this is obviously being factored in because of all these injuries that have happened, and this is why we're seeing returns like Shane McMahon and people like Dean Ambrose dropping IC titles to Kevin Owens, because there's really nothing to offer us for main events this year, and that's why Dean Ambrose has taken a step up now in the main event against Brock Lesnar. This is the WrestleMania main event to me, not Shane McMahon versus The Undertaker. Out of all the people you could have had for The Undertaker to fight, Shane McMahon is the best you have. Out of every legend The Undertaker faced throughout his WrestleMania streak, and everybody he defeated over the years, 10 world champions and so many legends with an over a 20-plus year streak. I mean, come on, Shane McMahon is the best you have to fight The Undertaker. Vince McMahon versus The Undertaker and Shane McMahon versus Kane are two different rivalries that made sense back in 2003, but this is not 13 years ago. It's 13 years too late that this is happening, and the best you have to that is Roman Reigns versus Triple H, a match that makes no sense when Dean Ambrose got one of the biggest pops of the night this year at the Royal Rumble. Someone please explain to me where this has all gone wrong and why this is happening the way it is, because I think the match everyone is excited for is obviously Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar, because of how unpredictable this is, and to be honest with you, I'm excited to see where we go from here. If you have a thought, you can give it to me in the comments of this video at Jonathan Clarke 22 on my YouTube channel. You can tweet me on Twitter at Jonathan Clarke 1, and you can get in touch with me on my Facebook page at HEW Entertainment, and let me know what you think of Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose and what your predictions are for this match. I'm going with either Dean Ambrose or Brock Lesnar hands Dean Ambrose's ass, and Dean Ambrose gets a standing ovation as he's helped out of the ring, refusing help. That's probably one of the two ways, and probably one of the emphatic ways this one is going to go. But who can blame me for being excited for Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar as much as what I am? I think I speak for every wrestling fan and everyone who ever was a fan of Dean Ambrose, every single person whoever was out there. I think this match is the best match this year on the WrestleMania card, and the one that everyone is the most excited for. And I don't think I'm wrong in having said anything I have in relation to Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose.